Okay, today we're going to do 1-4, adding real numbers. Since you guys get to use your calculator, I'm going to go through this really quickly, but just a refresher. Adding numbers with the same sign. Okay, again, I taught this in 7th grade, so I know that you've had it for a few years. Adding numbers with the same sign, when anything has the same sign, you add and keep the sign. I need to change my pen. That's a little bit of a thick writing there. Okay, so, 5 plus 7 is 12. Just add it. Negative 5 plus negative 7, you still add to get 12, but it's going to be a negative. Okay, you're going to the left down the number line. Now, since you can use your calculator, you can do in your calculator negative 5 plus negative 7, you'll get negative 12. This is the exact same problem. It just has the parentheses, which tends to throw people off. Since there's this addition sign, you're still adding. You're not multiplying. So this is also negative 12. Okay, I just like to put that in there because sometimes people get confused. Adding numbers with different signs, you actually end up subtracting and taking the sign of the larger number and keeping the sign of the larger number, of the larger absolute value, I should say, of the larger absolute value. Or you can just think number. So negative 2 plus 6, okay, you're actually doing 6 minus 2 to get 4, and since the 6 is bigger and it's a positive, that's why you keep the 4. That's why it's a positive 4. Or you can think, I'm $2 in debt, but I paid 6 to the bank, so now I'm $4 ahead. Okay, or it's 2 below 0, it went up 6 degrees, now I'm at 4 above 0. Okay, so it's positive. Okay, now 2 plus negative 6, again, you still subtract. Okay, so you're still going to get 4, and since that the negative is with the bigger number, the bigger absolute value, then it's going to be a negative. Okay, or you can think I have $2, but I charged 6, so now I'm in debt 4. Okay, again, you can put this in your calculator, 2 plus negative 6. Again, I wrote this because it's the exact same thing, but people get thrown off with those parentheses. You're still going to get negative 4. All right? All right. Next, we're going to evaluate. Again, I think we've done this before. I call it plug and chug because you're just plugging a number in and chugging a number out. So negative n plus 8.9. When n equals negative 2.3. This is when those parentheses come in handy. I said whenever you plug in, you got to put in parentheses. And don't lose that negative. So we have a negative from right there. And then we have negative 2.3 plus 8.9. Okay? So you need to know that this is kind of like negative times a negative. Anytime there's two negatives right next to each other like this with nothing in between, that becomes a positive. You might have heard it, add the opposite, or however you want to think about it. Or if you put this in your calculator, negative 2/3 is going to give you positive. So that actually becomes not 2/3, 2.3 plus 8.9. Okay, so positive 2.3 plus 8.9 is going to give you 11.2. You need to show some work. I want to see that you can plug that in correctly. So you for sure have to show me this. Okay? And if you're not sure, you need to show me this to make sure so I know what you're doing wrong if you miss it. Okay? So same thing here, we're plugging it in. Okay, there's not a negative here though this time. You can still use a parenthesis, you don't necessarily have to. If we can just keep with the theme. So that we have a negative there. So now we have negative 2.3 minus 3.8. Okay, technically this should be plus since we're adding. So let's change this because we'll do minuses next time. So change this to an addition problem. Okay, so negative 2.3 plus 3.8. Okay, so really we're subtracting and it's going to be positive. Okay, so 3.8 minus 2.3. Remember, you have to line up the decimals, or you can just use your calculator again. 8, 5. So 1.5. Since I changed that, I didn't have that in my notes, so I needed to work it out there. So positive 1.5. Okay. Now over here, we're using the same number. I just didn't write it again. N equals negative 2.3. Okay. So 8.5 plus, and this is a negative, and then we're putting a negative in there. So again, it's a negative, and if you want to put another parentheses in there, you don't have to. That might confuse you a little bit. That's okay. We can just put those two negatives right next to each other. Anytime we have two negatives right next to each other, we know that that becomes a positive. Okay, so 8.5 plus 2.3. Again, if you put negative 2.3 in your calculator, it'll come out positive 2.3. Okay, so your answer, 10.8. So again, you need to show me something. You need to show me how you put that in. Okay, how you plug that in correctly. Okay, so here's a little word problem. Actually, on integers, word problems seem to be easier than just doing the problems. A rock climber climbs a mountain. The base of the mountain is 132 feet below sea level. So you kind of have to know what it's talking about. So here's the water. Okay. Here, let's make it a green mountain. Here is our mountain. Okay. What it's saying, okay, and it doesn't mean that it's in the ocean. Well, this is just the sea level. It just happens to be, if this is sea level, this is considered negative. So the base of it is at negative 132 feet. Okay, it's 132 feet below sea level. That's just letting you know that it's in the negatives. Okay. Again, this mountain could be next, could be in a, it's not necessarily in the water. That gets a little confusing there. Write an expression to represent the situation. So all it's saying is a rock climber is climbing a mountain. They start at negative 100. Whoops. Here, let me erase that. They start at negative 132 feet because it's the base of the mountain. Again, it's not in water. It's just like kind of how they tell you that it's a negative. So negative 132 feet plus whatever he's climbing. Whatever he ends up climbing. Okay, that's an expression. That's why it says write an expression here. Remember, it doesn't say write an equation. So no matter how far he goes, he's starting at negative 132. Find the climber's height when he has climbed 485 feet. Since you're starting at negative 132, then you're going to add 485 feet. That doesn't mean you're up here 485. It means you've actually climbed 485 feet. So you got to get, this is 0 right here. So then you start in the positives. Okay, so negative 132 plus 485 is 353, and yes, you have to write it out, what it is. What are we talking about? I want you to know, because some people might say 353 people or, mountains. They'll just kind of go crazy and not know what they're talking about. Okay, you got to let me know that you know what you're talking about. Okay, adding matrices. Okay, matrices. You have to know that the up and down are called columns. Okay, the side to sides are called rows. Okay, so in this one there are two, in this particular one, there's 2 columns and 3 rows. Okay, they are named rows by columns. So this would be considered a 3 by 2 matrix. This is not 3 times 2, it's 3 by 2. If I said, how big is your room, you would say 10 by 15. And you would write it 10 and it looks like times, but it's 10 by 15. When you add matrices, they have to be the same size. They have to be the same size in order to add them. Okay? And you just add the same position. 5 plus a negative 9 is a negative 4. 3.2 plus a negative 1.7 is 1.5. Negative 4.9 plus a negative 11.1 is negative 16. Okay, so that's it. It has to look the same. And sorry, I couldn't find the matrices in what I used to write my problems out, so I had to just do it by hand. So sorry about that. Okay, so negative 4. So again, you just do it in the same position. Negative 4 plus a negative 5 is a negative 9. You write it in the same position. 7/8 plus a negative 3/4. Again, you can put that in your calculator if you like to find common denominators and do it that way. You know, this would become negative 6/8. And you add it together and then reduce it. So this becomes 1/8. Normally, as a rule, if it starts as a fraction, you leave it as a fraction. If it starts as a decimal, you leave it as a decimal. Okay, 3/4 and 1/2 is 1 1/4. And then 0 plus a negative 1 is negative 1. And that's it. We'll get into more matrices later, but right now you just add them. But if they're not the same size, you cannot add them. You just say, can't add. Here's a little comic.